Yes. Well, the State Department has admitting that the U.S. is fighting the war in Ukraine in order to make money. We've been telling you this, but now they have actually just written it down. We are in it for a total money-making enterprise. We're going to show this to you. Later in the segment also, I want to show you what happens when you Google or talk to Google Bard. Google Bard is their ChatGPT AI, artificial intelligence chat about the war in Ukraine. And even artificial intelligence through Google talks all kinds of nonsense about what is actually the cause of this conflict in Ukraine. But first to this memo that just came out. This is a State Department memo from the United States State Department. It was released in late August, but only was made public this week. It's called the Integrated Country Strategy. So basically, it's like a business plan for what you want to do when you're a startup, right? It's basically a business plan for Ukraine. The memo shows how the United States just wants to make money rebuilding Ukraine and is full of all kinds of hypocritical statements about it. So for instance, here's the chief mission, right? Chief mission, a clear, transparent strategy to de-oligarch the economy and deliver prosperity for all is central to these reforms. Now let's just talk a minute, Clayton. When I say oligarch, what does that say to you?
To me, it seems like a rich elite. Like a rich elite billionaire. I think of Jeff Bezos. I think of an oligarch like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Alexei Navalny is from an oligarch family as well.
Yeah. I think like a history, a legacy, an oligarchy, a history.
Okay. Right. But mostly they just have to be Russian.
Well, I guess.
Or Belarusian. Right.
I get. Well, you're talking about in the Russian side of it.
I'm talking about in the vernacular that we use it in the Western media. We're not part of them.
Yeah. It would definitely be a Russian. Yeah. You'd have to be an oligarch. You'd have to be Russian.
It's like sweaty, fat, rich, gold teeth,
cigar smoking,
pinky ring,
hanging out on a yacht.
Yeah. With makes bad decisions for the people.
With 14-year-old girls. Yeah. That's
okay.
What I picture.
A lot of chest hair. Yeah. You're with me on this, right? Yeah. There's an archetype, right?
I see what you're saying.
So what we're trying to say here, the State Department is trying to say, if we could just pull that back up, is they want to de-oligarch the economy, the Ukrainian economy, and achieving this public commitment to reform and real implementation will send positive signals to private sector investors for recovery and reinforce U.S. and international military development and economic support. Now, this is a blatant admission, you guys, that they want our oligarchs instead of theirs.
So
right?
They're basically saying we want BlackRock. We want our United States oligarchy, BlackRock, rather than the Russian oligarchy or the Ukrainian oligarchy.
Right. We don't want any oligarchs whose first language was Russian. We only want our own oligarchs, right? Because oligarch is another word for just private sector investors. So what they're saying is we love private sector investors. We don't like oligarchs. They are the same thing. That's just media spin. I guess they don't think that we know this. But again, an oligarch is just a business person from the private sector. So what they're saying quite clearly is the U.S. wants Russian investors out, U.S. investors in. They say it again here with this ridiculous word that we showed you, de-oligarchization. Say that 10 times.
Yeah, who came up with that? The de-oligarchization.
Stupidest thing I ever heard in my whole life.
Yeah.
Particularly of the energy and mining sector is a core tenet to building back a better Ukraine, as the political control wielded by the oligarchs who rose since Ukraine's independence has fueled a system of corruption and anti-democratic trends. That's wrong. I just finished a book by Thane Gustafsson called The Bridge about the energy sector as it's developed from the 1960s between Ukraine, Russia, and Western Europe. So no, that's wrong. Do a little research. That's actually not that these oligarchs rose up since Ukraine's independence. It was a lot more interconnected than that. U.S. government economic assistance is also crucial to achieving a decentralized, modern, and competitive economy. So again, it's out with you guys, in with us. Now, we have seen this played out before. Can you think of where this playbook happened before, where people who lived in that region were starting to become prosperous or turn to other nations to prosper, And the United States wanted to make space for American business interests and wage war. Can you think of where that has happened in the last 30 years? You don't have to answer. I'll answer for you. Iraq is one. Syria is one. Afghanistan is another. So those nations, Libya is another. Anytime any politician got any notion of prospering from their own resources, the United States waged war there and was doing the bidding of private business interests, right? This is, I don't think anyone can fight with me about this. This is exactly what's happening in Ukraine. The government is doing the bidding, basically going in, and they're like the cleaners, right? They're going in and setting up a destruction site, scorched earth, so that business interests can get in there. Is this what we stand for as Americans? I don't. I like the idea of strong American companies that compete fairly and no one has to die. I'm fine with international competition and investment, but fairly, without death, no death.
So this whole thing was leaked, by the way, right?
No, it says it says on the front page for public release. So It's not a leak.
Because according to Politico, this was leaked, right? This leaked U.S. strategy on Ukraine about the corruption. I mean, is this what we're talking about here? The leaked U.S. strategy on corruption?
But then why on the title page does it say for public release?
I don't know, but I mean, if you're listening to Politico and they try to cover it up, they'll be, this was, this is...
Maybe they're pretending they got a scoop, or maybe it was a draft. I don't care. They're liars anyway.
I mean, the long-term U.S. plan, right, that this is how we're going to get rid of malfeasance and Ukrainian corruption, right, that would cause Western allies basically to abandon Ukraine. And I think, you can say that it was leaked. I think it was intentional. I think it was absolutely intentional that they released this. And in my opinion, it's a way for the United States government to use this as an excuse. We're leaking this because we want to make people aware of the corruption there. And then when all of this fails, we can fully blame it on Ukraine.
Right. Okay. I don't necessarily care how, maybe we saw it early. That's what Politico's saying. But it does clearly say that this is for, and these are talking points that the State Department does say quite clearly. I think that they don't expect that we're going to read between the lines between these de-oligarchization. I think they think that's totally fine because they've done their bidding of successfully branding oligarchs as this archetype that we talked about, the hairy, sweaty,
right,
shirtless, open silk shirt type character, right? And so I think most Americans would read this and be like, yeah, out with those oligarchs, in with Jeff Bezos or whatever. Right. Now, I don't know what Jeff Bezos' interest is in Ukraine. We're using him as an archetype of American oligarch. So don't get me wrong. I don't know anything about that. Now, is this, again, the State Department saying that we need to increase American presence in Ukraine in order to actually pull this off? Because, they need a lot of cultural exportation in order to tell people to do it our way. What they call it is a leveling up in Ukraine, level up U.S. presence to secure the future. But in order for all these wonderful things to happen, what they think, U.S. contractors get a big job to rebuild Ukraine. U.S. diplomats everywhere spreading Western messages. Ukraine first has to, they say, slay the corruption dragon. Someone's been reading their Joseph Campbell. Okay, as if it's just look how they say it. Slay the corruption dragon once and for all. It's just this petty little thing. They need to stabilize and invigorate Ukraine's economy and advance greater integration into global markets. Ukraine should espouse Western standards and practices. Slay that. We're not corrupt.
Right. Espouse Western standards and practices. Yeah.
Basically, be more like us, like me, darling, not like you. That little thing that has called corruption that has Ukraine at the top of corruption lists all throughout Europe. I mean, that has kept them off the EU membership. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can we just call this what it is? It's a total lie and it's an obfuscation. They've been literally saying for a year and a half now that Ukraine has made major strides in its corruption. We do not have that level of corruption anymore. They are now they are really a standard for how you can really turn your country around. But here in black and white, it shows that the United States government actually doesn't believe that. The Biden administration knows better than that. They absolutely do not believe that Ukraine has turned itself around, that it is massively corrupt. But they're not telling us that publicly. Jake Sullivan, all of those clowns in the White House press briefing room, at the State Department briefing room, the Department of Defense briefing room, all of them have been lying to us, telling us that their corruption has been eliminated, that this is a bastion of democracy. You are sending your taxpayer dollars to Ukraine to fight for democracy. Their democratic standards are what we're fighting for. It's all been a lie.
Absolutely. And, the way that it's written here so capriciously, it's almost like, we'll get married once you stop smoking. It's like a tiny little thing, like just
right.
That little corruption thing. But they won't have much choice once we move in there. Once the mother-in-law moves in, you're screwed, right? I would just like to remind you of a few ways that Ukraine is still corrupt. Paying off politicians, benefiting from the private sector and public sector. They have their own oligarchs. They do. Terrorizing opposition leaders, banning opposition media, closing churches. They have no religious freedom. That little thing called corruption that we're sending all of our taxpayers towards supporting. Now, after they tear down, this corruption little business, then they, I guess, think the idea is not we wait until we win, even though this memo is full of like, we're going to win. They say, but Russia still has 22% of land that used to be Ukraine's. And so we may just have to keep fighting and we'll do all this rebuilding, even though we're going to gain back that land. So let's again look at the map of the conflict, as we like to do here. Even the State Department saying that they're not really gaining much land, but we think they're still going to win. What you're looking at there in red is the Donbas region. Those are the people that asked Russia to come in and protect them from increasing attacks from Ukraine in 2021 and 2022. Russia's parliament voted to do that, even though Putin didn't want to. And they came in and set up that line since March of 2022. Now, that's why we won't use the term unprovoked Russian invasion. They were asked by those people. Those people later voted to become a part of Ukraine. Those people to become a part of Russia. Those people now are prevented from being further attacked by the line there. So Ukraine continues to throw men's lives against that border, hoping to push back that red. The red hasn't moved. It hasn't moved much at all in all of 2023. Now, the State Department can sort of keep going on about this, like we can rebuild. I saw a funny comment in the chat saying build back better, the Joe Biden campaign line.
Yeah, but it's for Ukraine, not
for
the US.
Ukraine,
yeah.
Right. They can pretend the war was in Kiev and, then secure some lucrative contracts for the U.S. while firing young, innocent lives at that line. I mean, who cares? It's not American lives, right? I guess we're not supposed to really care that much as long as, we keep throwing stuff at that electric fly swatter. Meanwhile, the Pentagon sent a letter to Congress admitting that the U.S. is running out of money and weapons to fund Ukraine. President Biden admitted on Saturday that if Ukraine was part of the shutdown negotiations behind the scenes, well, that, we don't know. That's something that the Biden administration absolutely doesn't want to happen. Now, why was our government shut down based on Ukraine? You may be asking yourself, even though the negotiations seem to be cooled for a minute. Well, here is White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at a loss for words at the same thing that we're all pondering.
Is it possible the president made a deal that you don't know about?
I'm just saying that I'm not going to go beyond what the president said. Just not going to go beyond.
Was what he said true?
I'm not going to go beyond what the president said.
So you won't say that what he said was true?
I'm not going to go beyond what the president
You're
said.
declining to say that what he said was true.
I just answered. Go ahead.
Okay.
Well, she doesn't want to get thrown under the bus. So were these negotiations, in fact, true? Was the government shutdown tied to Ukrainian funding? And so we're going to keep the government open only if we allow government funding to go to Ukraine? And the president says that those were part of the negotiations with House Speaker McCarthy. And
Yes.
she won't further talk about it. She can't talk about it. You can't. He said it. You're not confirming that what he said is true. Those negotiations did happen. We're going to fund Ukraine rather than basically fund our own government.
Right. And so, these lies from the State Department are necessary to continue this propaganda that this must continue to happen. Just today, I was experimenting with Google Bard, and I was looking for...
What is Google Bard?
Google Bard is the ChatGPT competitor. It's an artificial intelligence sort of chat back and forth that Google launched recently, because I was looking for a headline that I had found about 2 weeks ago, and I just couldn't seem to find it. So I asked Google Bard to go find it for me, and it refused because, and I wish I can remember, and I didn't mark it, but the headline said, I think it was some Western source, either Europe or NATO admits that Russia has gained more land in 2023 than Ukraine, which is true. We've been watching this map all along. And so I asked Google Bard to go find it for me, and here's what I got. I know this is hard to see. They basically said Russia has not gained more land since the counteroffensive began in June 2022. Well, that's not when the counteroffensive began. That's a year later. They're saying, in fact, Ukraine has retaken some territory, including Kherson. And you see what I wrote down below? I was like, this is not true. And it responded, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I have reviewed some reports, and you're right. Russia has gained more land. So, I literally had to teach it.
You had to
because
teach
it
Google.
was telling me. But it's hilarious that they say Russia has not gained more land, and Ukraine has gained in these three ways. And it gives me these 3 bullet points. By Western military aid is how Ukraine has gained, not land, but they're telling me ways. Also, high morale. What the F?
So they've gained because of high morale? That was their second reason?
Because of high morale.
I don't know
and
if you saw
because of Russian logistical problems.
I don't know if you saw the massive parades that were taking place today, the funeral processions that were taking place today in Ukraine, carrying coffins of dead soldiers out, where people were lining the streets crying as their Ukrainian young men are just being carried by coffins. Open caskets, by the way. It's horrible images to see. If you want to see them, you can absolutely see them. That's the high morale that Google's talking about?
Right.
What the hell are they talking about?
Crazy. I mean, we've done segment after segment after segment about the opposite, low morale. So how Google's ChatGPT tells me that they have high morale, I don't know what that's based on.
I have low morale about artificial intelligence.
And so later I told them, I don't know if this second screen you can see, I said, Kherson is a part of Russia. It is not in Ukrainian hands, which was one of the first things that it had told me. So imagine that I'm not a studied journalist, but I'm just some a-hole using this program. I would just be like, oh, great, they gained back Kherson. That's not true. I know that that's not true. So I told them this AI, and they said, oh, yeah, you're right. That's true. You are correct. Kherson is currently under Russian occupation. However, international bodies don't recognize that. It was a sham election, yada, yada, yada. I proceeded. This is how I was using my time this afternoon.
And I heard her yelling from the other room.
I proceeded to have an argument and say, how do you know it was a sham election? Oh, sources say, I mean, it was, but I just want to point out this last point that I ended this conversation, because Google Bard and I were having a fight, and I said, okay, well, it was like Westerners are, condemning Russia's occupation, the Russian election, blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, well, when will Ukraine be condemned for attacks on the Donbass and Crimea? And they gave me a very existential answer, like, yes, that's been accused, but we don't know that it's real. The International Criminal Court is currently investigating that, but it's too early to say when it will be. Okay, it's been going on for 10 years, but it's too early to say. It's possible Ukraine will never be condemned for attacks on the Donbass and Crimea. It's complicated, they say. It's a hard answer. It's like a existential question, like, why do birds sing in the morning kind of thing. It's hilarious to have this conversation and think about someone who is not otherwise studied on this conflict, just swallowing this crap. Be like, yeah, that's how it is then. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. This week, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke to Canadian politician Chrystia Freeland. She's a COVID pusher, among other things.
Among other things.
Yeah, and she said that the U.S. is supporting the war in Ukraine to warn off China. Watch.
Now, I agree with you, Madam Secretary, that the single strongest message of deterrence we can send to China is a decisive Ukrainian victory. That is something. That is the message that says to all the world's dictators, you know what? Democracy is prepared to fight back, and democracy can actually win.
Okay, so now Hillary Clinton is no longer an elected government official, but her message should warn us that Ukraine must be an opening act for this war in China. That's why Pentagon rhetoric continues to ratchet up the idea of a draft in 2030. They've said we're not going to be done in Ukraine for at least that much time. And then by then we may have the war in China that we want. Now, anyone who has military-aged children needs to be paying attention to this like I am, because I do not want my kids drafted into a conflict that I absolutely disagree with. So now is the time to demand that your politicians vote for peace right now. It's time to call them out on these lies and let them know you're not taking our kids into and we should absolutely not be sending money and sacrificing other people's kids. No. So let us know what you think of this. Again, I think it's just an absolute admission that the United States wants our businessmen for their businessmen. It's just a matter of dollars.
Yeah, read the original Politico article today and see if Politico was not the place the government just handed them this leaked State Department memo. Go read it for yourself.
Well, I will link to the original document, not Politico, in the chat tomorrow so that you can read the document and not the Western spin on it. You can... Yeah, if you want to.
But that was the original reporting of it. But, you know, the Politico, if you want stuff leaked, you just hand it to Politico, right? That's how this goes. Anyway, let us know your thoughts on this in the comments below, in the chat below. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for subscribing to the show, being a part of our great crew here. We really, really appreciate it. If you do subscribe, your name will pop up here on the big screen right behind us while we are live. We've got more news to get to here on your, what is today? Tuesday? Today's Taco Tuesday. We're going to look at this child trafficking expose, bombshell story, muckraker.com getting their hands on exclusive information confronting federal workers who were carrying children to the airport to be trafficked, going to these facilities and tracking these individuals down, finding these facilities that are housing thousands of illegal immigrant children who are being held in the United States. Why are they there? How are they there? Where are they being trafficked? Wait until you see this report. We're going to get to that next. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.